Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today for our Microsoft Flow webinar, How Do You Flow? Just a little bit about Protiviti before we get started. We provide consulting solutions in finance, technology, operations, data analytics, governance, risk, and internal audit to our clients through our network of more than 70 offices in over 20 countries. Our full-service software solutions team provides consulting and on-demand support for SharePoint, Office 365, Salesforce, Nintex, Sitecore, Kentico, SQL, and .NET. Our 30 on Thursday webinar series is a monthly webinar series where we talk all things Microsoft, enterprise content management, and software services. You can see our full event schedule at protiviti.com/events and check out our ECM blog at ecm.protiviti.com/blog. We are hosting an Office 365 in a Day event in Northern Virginia on September 12th. This complimentary event will cover Office 365 security and compliance, a OneDrive workshop, a Teams workshop, and a SharePoint Online workshop. Attendees can earn up to 7 CPE credits. This event is almost sold out, so if you're interested in registering, you can register at Office 365inaday.eventbrite.com. Thank you for submitting your questions for today's presentation. We received a lot of great questions, so we tailored today's presentation to address as many of your questions as possible. We have a packed agenda, so if we do not answer your question today, an expert will be following up with you. If you have any additional questions during today's presentation, please insert it in the GoToMeeting toolbar in the question window, and we will answer as many questions as we can after the presentation. Today's session is being recorded, and the recording of today's presentation will be on our YouTube channel along with other past webinar recordings. We will be sending out today's link to all of today's attendees. Today's presenters are Antonio Maio, 8-time Microsoft MVP, Maggie Swearingen, Associate Director here at Protiviti, and Corey Harrison, Director here at Protiviti, and I am Julia Marple, and I will be moderating today's session. All right, let's get started, Antonio. Let's kick it off.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Julia. Thanks for that. Julia, are you able to hear me okay?
Yep, sound great.
Great. All right, well, welcome everyone to our webinar. We wanted to start off a little bit just level setting everyone on what is Microsoft Flow. So Flow is Microsoft's new cloud-based workflow platform. Now, I call it new, but it's really been out for, I think it's going on about 2 years now. It's in the last year or so, Flow though has gotten a lot of attention out in the community. So it still feels like it's very new. There's a lot of stuff coming out for it all the time. It's really designed to enable automation across SaaS applications, across cloud-based services, and across data services. So it's not specific to SharePoint as we're traditionally used to with Flow. And it's designed to enable, people like power users, information workers, what you might call a citizen developer or system integrator, to automate business processes within their organization. So it's really designed, initially for individuals to automate potentially parts of their own job or potentially parts of, enterprise class workflows. The design experience is very easy to use. It's web-based. It's easily accessed through the Microsoft Cloud as well. So for example, if you're already in Office 365 and you have an Office 365 license, that means you also have a Flow license, and you can access it through the app launcher, and that's where you'll see the web-based interface for it. Now that said, you don't need an Office 365 license to actually use it. There's actually a free SKU as well that gives you some limited capabilities within Flow, but there's still a lot you can accomplish there. And it's really getting more and more integrated with SharePoint, with OneDrive, with Excel, and with some of the other Microsoft applications in the cloud that you'll see. And I think we'll see a little bit more about that in just a minute. We received a lot of questions leading up to this webinar, in particular about comparisons between SharePoint Designer workflows, what we traditionally have built workflows in SharePoint with or started with, and Microsoft Flow. And we want to talk a little bit about some of the differences. So, Julie, I'm going to ask you to go through some of these. Great. So, what I'll say the first difference is that we'd want to highlight is designer workflows are very specific to SharePoint. The workflows run within SharePoint or within the workflow timer service within SharePoint, and they're designed specifically to automate SharePoint capabilities. Whereas with Microsoft Flow, it's designed as a more general cloud-based workflow service. It's not tied to any specific product. It allows you to access actions or triggers within Microsoft cloud-based applications, but even outside of Microsoft cloud-based applications. So, for example, if you want to perform an action within Salesforce.com or within Dropbox or Box or Twitter or Facebook and so on. So it's really designed to enable workflows across SaaS applications and cloud services. Now, the next thing in Designer is Designer was traditionally used by technical SharePoint people, I'll say, and it was designed to build, enterprise class workflows, or let's say it was used to build enterprise class workflows. And there's a lot you're able to do with Designer. Whereas with Flow, it's really designed, like I mentioned earlier, for the power user, for the information worker, citizen developers and integrators. And Microsoft talks about this, and I think this makes a lot of sense. It's really about democratizing workflow automation. So not relegating it to just a DevOps team or an internal development team, but actually enabling everyone in your organization to build automation. Now, with SharePoint Designer, there are some workflow limitations there. If you dig into it, there are workflow limitations that you can find, but we don't tend to run into them as frequently with Designer. At least I don't remember running into them with Designer workflows in the past. If you take a look at things like SharePoint 2013 Designer workflows, they do run within the Microsoft Cloud. They are, so do SharePoint 2010 workflows, but SharePoint 2013 workflows, they run based on the app model. They make REST calls into SharePoint to access data very much like Flow does, and they do get throttled as well, but through different mechanisms than Flow. Flow has some slightly different limitations that you tend to hear about these days. So, for example, Flow runs are limited per month. So the way you buy Flow or you measure your Flow license is based on the number of workflow runs that run in a month. And with an Office 365 license, each Flow license is limited to 2,000 runs per month. Now, those Flow runs are actually aggregated across all the Office 365 licenses in your tenant. So, for example, if you've got 100 users, then you have 200,000 Flow runs available. If you have 1,000 users, you have 2 million Flow runs available. So it's actually really hard to hit that limit, despite the fact that there is a limit there. As well, there are additional Flow licenses you can purchase that give you higher limits as well per month. As well, there are some other more technical limitations based on, the length, the maximum length of Flow can run is 30 days. Synchronous calls, they time out after 120 seconds. There's a few of these that you might run into depending on how complex your flows are getting. Now, rarely do we see flows run more than 30 days, but occasionally there are business processes where they do. So, for example, if you have long-running approval workflows, perhaps you have an approval workflow that has to go to many people within a committee and they all have to do many things, so your flow might have to run for long another period of time. Flows will time out after 30 days. And I wouldn't recommend going back to SharePoint Designer for these. There are other great tools out there for building workflows. One great example that we work with is Nintex. And Nintex does let you run workflows for longer than 30 days. And it has various capabilities, some of which overlap with Flow and some that are, perhaps a superset that allow you to do more than Flow does. So that's another great tool to look at. Another difference is SharePoint Designer has a long history of supporting many SharePoint actions. There's very few actual actions within SharePoint that you can't do with Designer workflows. Whereas with Flow, you are a little bit more limited in those actions. There's actually 29 actions. There's 8 triggers for the SharePoint connector within Microsoft Flow. Now, the way Flow connects to different web-based services is through a series of connectors. And there's a huge number of connectors available. There's 211 right now, I believe. And they let you do various things depending on, what the SharePoint connector lets you do, or the Facebook connector, or the Dropbox connector, and so on. There are a couple of limitations that people have highlighted out in the community. For example, there's no native support for site creation through Flow, through the Flow actions for SharePoint. There's no native support for document sets as well. So those are 2 that we tend to hear about. However, you can make those work. There are other ways with the SharePoint connector to accomplish those things, right? One way is calling the send an HTTP request to SharePoint action, and that'll let you do just about anything in SharePoint. Another way is perhaps calling an Azure function or Azure automation that has PowerShell or other types of code that actually make those REST calls and allow you to do those things. So there's some nice native ways for flows to call other, Azure platform as a service-based options. And then finally, one of the key differences is there's no further investment from Microsoft in SharePoint Designer, whereas there is significant investment from Microsoft in Microsoft Flow, right? Microsoft Flow is Microsoft's go-forward platform when it comes to workflow automation in the cloud.
Great, thanks, Antonio. And now Corey's going to talk about how clients are using Flow.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. This is Corey Harrison. I'm the director of our Office 365 team. I'm based out of Chicago. All right, so we'll kind of keep it short here. So we want to give you an example. The best way to, really how we're using it. We have plenty of examples, but this was a very interesting client of ours. It's a financial services firm, and what they really focused on was the ability to connect. They want to connect their Microsoft Dynamics CRM tool to Office 365 for the purpose of bringing in metadata. The CRM system was a system of record of all this information, quite a bit of information. It changed regularly, and each opportunity that they would be tracking had potentially hundreds of megabytes of data, files to each one. So it was a big deal. The problem was that they did not have Dynamics Office 365. So the Dynamics was still on-premise, and obviously Office 365 was not. So the solution that we really came up with was to leverage both Microsoft Flow and Azure Logic Apps together, which is, as Antonio talks about, is a more development-focused area of Flow. It allows you to create more complicated Flow tools. So what we did here was we brought over and built a connector that would actually send information from Microsoft Dynamics into Office 365, into a mailbox, into a service account, into Exchange. And one of the real powers of Flow in general, and we've seen this across many different applications, was that using Flow within Exchange to kick off workflows and different processes is a really powerful tool. And so this email that would come in to Office 365 would really get us the opportunity to take Flow, grab this information, and what Flow would do is then pull information out of both the email from who it's from the subject, and text that was also within the email itself, using Flow, write it into a SharePoint list, a SharePoint Online list. And from there, we created another application, or using another Flow-based process in Azure Logic Apps that would go from there, which would then either provision different document sets and update metadata within it. And this process going all the way through really showed how we could leverage out-of-the-box SharePoint, both from document management and using out-of-the-box email capabilities and lists, and just use Flow and Logic Apps on top of it to really keep these two systems in sync. I think one of the things I did want to talk about, I don't have a slide on this, but just talk about, I think it's important to talk about whether it's SharePoint Designer or Nintex, there's other ways that tools that come in, and this is a great example of how we've used multiple tools in an environment like this, where in a very similar case, we had emails coming in a request format for different provisioning of sites. And we use Flow, similar to this example I'm showing on screen right now, we use Flow to grab the email, extract the data that was important, because they had a different request system outside of SharePoint. That's why it had to be an email. And would come in, and we would then write that out, and then we actually use, in this case, we use Nintex to help provision sites based on this metadata. I think there were at the time, there was definitely some limitations on the Flow side. The client had Nintex, and so we were able to use Flow to call and eventually reach out and integrate with Nintex. So it's another powerful tool of having a platform like Office 365 and Flow, and then potentially leveraging what you've already purchased into a better solution. Yeah, there you go.
Great, thanks, Corey. And now Maggie's going to talk about what's new and what's coming.
Hi everyone, how are you? I'm Maggie Swearingen. I'm a user experience and information architect here out of our DC office. I'm also a big fan of flow typically actually from an individual standpoint. So I'm going to show you a couple of things today that have recently come out that I think are big wins for those of us who are business users. A lot of us just really aren't capable of building complex workflows, but we want simple things, typically for individual needs. And I'm going to walk us through a couple of quick wins that I think you could shop around your office or maybe show your teams and have a lot of quick success with Flow. Julia, I am not seeing an option to share my screen yet. There we go, thank you. So I'm going to quickly demo 3 quick hits today, and then I'm going to talk about a new feature. One question we have gotten from the groups, from a lot of people over the course of the last couple weeks, is how can I stay up to date with what's happening with Flow? Microsoft has a fantastic Flow blog out there that they're constantly updating. They also have a weekly newsletter that you can sign up for that sends you the headlines from all of their recent releases. So I typically have that come into my inbox, and it's very easy for me to scan and then click on basically whatever I'm interested in following up on. So the first feature I'm going to show you today came out just a couple of weeks ago, so some of you may have already seen it. This is probably one of the #1 things that we have been asked to help with in the area of workflow, and I just did some air quotes there, over the course of the last decade that I've been working with SharePoint. And it's really all about simple approvals and asking for approval. So we all know that SharePoint document libraries have had simple approval and simple approval workflows built in for a long time. But even those weren't as simple as that title makes it sound. So there have been a lot of challenges with that, not necessarily inability to complete that action, but it was often frustrating for users. This new feature I find awesome. So you can see here I have a document library. I'm going to go ahead and select my document. You can actually only do this for a single document at a time. Right now, I've noticed it doesn't really give you the option if you have multiple documents selected. I'm going to go ahead and click my flow. And there's actually a new feature here, which is a built-in flow. As an end user, we don't even have to know that flow exists. And it's called request sign-off. So I'm going to go ahead and click that really quickly. And you'll see here, it's going to load up on a panel, and it's going to kind of tease the fact that it's a flow, but it's already been built for us. So I'm just going to go ahead and click create, and it's going to ask me who I want to request sign off from. So I'm going to put in my colleague Antonio here. And of course, since I'm demoing my Wi-Fi is slow, because isn't that the way that always works? So my approver, I'm going to type in Antonio. And he should come up here. That's not his last name. There we go. And I can give a little message if I want. And then I'm going to run my flow. What I love about this is if you watch over here, I have a brand new column called sign off status. And as this flow runs, that column, which I did not have to add, shows up, and it shows that this is pending. Antonio is going to get a notification, and he's going to be able to go in and approve the document. This is a very, very simple workflow. We're not talking about multi-state here or anything more complex, but simply I need somebody to review something. I don't want you to have to necessarily go into SharePoint and know that I've updated it. Here it is. Please review it. I get the status. Really, really simple, quick win. I would encourage all of you to go back and show your teams this really quick feature because it's already built in for us.
And I've already received the approval email, Maggie.
Good, good. Who'd have thought? It actually worked. Yay.
And I just approved that, so I'm not sure if we'll get a chance to see that status update, but that might be possible right on the webinar.
Yep. And I'm sure that would really excite everyone. It's still pending, but we can come back to it in a little bit. So the second thing I want to show everyone is actually also a newer feature. So You can imagine that there are people in your office who are going to be more proficient at first setting up flows than others. There are all of these very, very excellent templates out there. As a business user, I find that it does take me a little while to maybe set up a successful flow and to get it running. As it gains traction in your office, there are going to be more and more people who are more and more capable of doing this more and more quickly. For the time being, though, we typically have a situation where maybe you have one or two people in your office who set up a flow, but the flow actually benefits others. And again, we're going to talk about an approval workflow here that's a little bit different flavor of an approval workflow. So here I am in my document library again, and I'm going to go ahead to my flow and I'm going to create a flow. You'll notice I didn't have that request to sign off option because I haven't selected just one single document. When I do that, I get this panel here with some suggested flows. I can also show more. And I'm actually going to go ahead and see more templates, which opens up the template tab for us. Now, I've actually already kind of gotten us to this point. So I've opened up a simple approval workflow. And what this is an approval when an item is created in SharePoint. So the problem has been in the past for people is that the approval request comes from the person who set up the flow. So if I'm the IT manager in my office and I've created a bunch of flows for people to use, the request for approval always looks like it comes from me, which isn't terribly beneficial typically for all of us. I'm obviously not requesting approval from everything that's been loaded to the site. So Microsoft has actually improved the approval workflow for us. If you actually select this template, which is right here, it's the very top one, start approval when new item is SharePoint is added, you're going to see when new item is created, start an approval and condition. And you can work with this flow as you see fit. The problem is when we expand this one, we don't see who requested the approval. That's actually a new feature that's been built in. So for those of us who want to use that, we actually have to add a new connector. So I'm going to go to the plus sign and I'm going to add an action. And it's going to search for my actions and I'm going to type in approval here. And when I do this, I'm actually going to add a new approval action. And you'll see here that this one looks a little bit different than this one that I showed you before. This has approval type. If I select the approval type, which is great, now I can do serial or single. I also have an opportunity to put in who's requesting the approval, who I'm requesting the approval on behalf of. So instead of the requester always being me as the IT director or the person who created the flow, now I can put that the requester is the actual person who's creating the item in SharePoint. And we can actually use some macros to do that. So that's a fantastic feature. The steps to do this are outlined in their blog. But as I was walking through it as an end user, I noticed that it is a little bit unclear that you have to kind of add that new action in, and the new action is going to have the new features that they just rolled out this week to add that actual requester line in there. I only have a couple of more minutes here, so I want to give a quick mention to a new feature that just rolled out that is actually something that I think a lot of people are going to be really excited about. It's the Flow add-in for Excel. So I came here to my Excel application, I opened my Insert tab, and I went to the store and I searched for Flow, and I can go ahead and add this add-in here. Once I do that, my Excel spreadsheets can start talking to my SharePoint sites. So I can update rows in SharePoint, I can request approval for lines in an Excel spreadsheet. Why is this so fantastic? Well, I think all of us know that there are a lot of people who love their Excel spreadsheets and want to work in their Excel spreadsheets and don't necessarily want to translate any of that to SharePoint or SharePoint lists. With Flow integrated with Excel now, people who want to work in Excel can work in Excel, but those of us who want to be able to access that data from SharePoint and potentially leverage it in other ways via SharePoint, we can now connect those two items and do those two things. So the setup for this is a little bit more complex. We don't have time for that today. Again, it's actually all outlined in a recent blog entry from the Flow blog, but I did want to point that out because I think that's a fantastically exciting new feature. And the very last thing I want to talk about is actually an old feature that is very, very underused, and it's called the button. And one of the features about Flow that is so nice is that it truly, truly is a mobile application and can be a mobile application. So wouldn't it be great if it's not only a mobile application, but a one-click mobile application? If you come to your Flow templates, you actually have all these options for buttons. Buttons are going to create one-click actions in your Flow mobile app that will do things for you and will kick off flows for you just with clicking it with your thumb. So yesterday, I went ahead and actually set up a button for myself, which will, just scroll down and find it here. It's going to track my expenses in an Excel spreadsheet. So essentially what this does is with one click in my Flow app, I actually get a form that's going to ask me the cost, the type of expense, the client name, and it's actually going to even give me the opportunity to take a picture of my receipt and upload it. All of those items will then be sent directly to my Excel spreadsheet. So when I go to my third-party expense tracking system, I actually have an Excel spreadsheet that is a dated list with the receipts linked of all my expenses on a given trip. That's fantastic for those of us who are gathering expenses left and right, and then we have to go through our Outlook, or maybe we texted them to ourselves and we spend 4 hours one day doing our expenses because our expenses are all over the world. Well, in this case, we're going to consolidate our expenses and our sheets with one click via the app and be able to then take that Excel spreadsheet and go ahead and put it into any other system. Now, would I love it if it imported it straight into our third-party system? Absolutely, and I'd love to see us be able to put that together someday. That doesn't happen, but this is a really, really great way to do something like that really quickly, and I think that's an individual quick win. As you can see, the Flow template is here. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but a couple of things I want to point out. So you actually can pick out your Excel file name, and I've already loaded my Excel file name up here, and you store your Excel file in your OneDrive. So I have a file here that I call receipts, not surprisingly, probably. There's my expenses spreadsheet, and then I have my tables that are associated with this spreadsheet. So I've actually have my expense table. It will outline for you the columns that you need in this expenses Excel sheet, so you can actually create the Excel sheet. And once you do that, it pops down. It actually asks you for various things having to do with your notifications. Pretty simple to put together. On this other side here, if you don't have a receipt, or excuse me, if you do have a receipt, on this side, we actually give the folder path to where those receipts are scanned into your OneDrive. So in this case, I'm actually scanning those receipts into my receipts folder too, not surprisingly. So there's my folder path, and it's not together right now. It'll actually create a link so that it can store the link for the receipt, and then again, I can link up the same Excel file with the same Excel table. So if I have a receipt, great, it's going to go down this path and it's going to follow the flow to make sure that the link to the item and to the image of my receipt follows through. If I don't, it's going to go here, and I'm going to receive an indication in my email that I did this and that the flow was successful and that the line item was logged. Buttons, there are really tons of templates for buttons out there, and again, buttons are mobile, one-click actions that you're taking all the time. Now you don't have to really do anything to click off the flow. You just click the button, fill out the fields, and the flow runs. And I think that's a really, really quick win for all of us. We're down to the wire here, but Julia, I will turn it over to you and Antonio really quickly to follow up, to finish up here.
Thanks, Maggie. All right, Antonio, can you talk about what's coming to Microsoft Flow really quickly?
Great. So in a real quick 1-2 minute slide, so there's some great new capabilities coming to Microsoft Flow. If you follow the Microsoft Flow blog, you might see some announcements around this as well. One awesome new capability is you're going to actually have a Flow launch panel right within OneDrive for Business. So that experience that you saw from Maggie in SharePoint, where you can trigger flows right within SharePoint. That's also coming to OneDrive for Business, and you're even going to have a request sign-off flow there as well. If we look at the next one, there's going to be some more capabilities for SharePoint admins within Flow. So for example, a site owner can be prompted to run an approval process whenever they want to join a site to a hub site in a tenant. So that's a great new Flow capability for the SharePoint people in the audience. As well, you're going to be able to turn off, if you've turned off self-service site creation for people, you're going to actually be able to have an approval process for people to request sites before the site actually gets provisioned as well. There's a remind me flow that's coming, and what that's going to be is if you have a list or library that is a date time column, a user is going to be able to quickly provision a flow that sends out an alert based on an upcoming date within that column. So that's a nice little integration with SharePoint. An awesome capability that people are waiting for is Microsoft Teams integration, or deeper integration with Microsoft Teams with Flow. So you're going to actually be able to use Flow as a bot within Teams. So users will be able to click a Flow button that's embedded right within the team experience. And then from that, they'll be able to start a flow. It can do things like, you can ask the bot, list my flows. It'll come back with the flows, and you'll actually be able to trigger a flow right from that. So all right integrated within the Teams environment. The next item actually just launched last week. So there's some more flow management connectors out there for both makers and admins, where you'll be able to, if you need to apply governance to your flows within your organizations, as many organizations want to do now, you'll be able to track stats within your flow. You'll be able to, be alerted when flows get created, who the owners of those flows are, which connectors they're using, and so on. So you can monitor that as an admin. And there's going to be some new flow analytics coming in the next few weeks that give you statistics on execution, usage of flows, if flows have been shared, any errors that were reported, and so on. The final one for me is the most exciting of all, though. So the ability to be able to design your flows in Visio. So if you're a business user or an information worker, and I stole this screenshot from the Microsoft website. If you're a business user information worker, you'll be able to actually design your flows right within Visio. You'll be able to share this with other information workers and collaborate together to design a flow that automates a business process together. And then once it's complete, you'll be able to actually publish that from Visio to Microsoft Flow and provide your parameters. So this creates, I'll say, an even easier experience for designing flows and automating business processes within the Microsoft Cloud. And I'll leave it there, Julia.
Okay, great. We didn't have any additional questions for today's presentation. I know we went a couple minutes over, so I just want to thank everyone for attending. We have everyone's email up on the screen. We will be sending out the recording from today's presentation to all attendees tomorrow. Thank you all for attending today. Thank you, Antonio, Corey, and Maggie. Lots of great information. We really appreciate the great presentation.
Thanks, Julia. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everyone.